In today's video, I want to briefly discuss what ascension or ascension really is. Of course, there's many dimensions that could be added to the conversation that I'm going to share today. This is a rather complex topic. So, ascension is the process of consciousness evolving. And we evolve through various processions, through the process of coming into contact with, you could say in this lifetime, other beings or circumstances that hold both timelines or consciousness that is ahead of or behind or higher or lower than where we currently are. This process means that our consciousness is awakening to or becoming aware of the past, present, and future potentiality and reality of what we have been, are, and will be. This also means we get to rehabilitate the fallen aspects of ourselves, the aspects of ourselves which have fallen out of unity, and restore remembrance and embodiment of the risen and expanded aspects of consciousness. So we're seeing, if we look around us, you might interact with people, you might interact with circumstances that show you what could happen if you took a devolution path, if you took a divergent path. And you interact with people and circumstances that show you what your future could be like if you took the path of choosing to evolve or expand your consciousness. So we're exposed to both sides of the coin. We can see both consciousness that's slightly ahead of us, and we can see and are exposed to consciousness that's slightly behind us. That process of coming into contact with consciousness that's more expanded than us is really how we're initiated. It's how we evolve. So you could think about that as coming into contact with a person or a teacher that shows you something that is like a key that unlocks something that you really already knew in your being. You already contained some kind of cellular knowing or remembrance. But in coming into contact with that, it's sort of like the key goes in and that portion of the blueprint gets unlocked into your conscious awareness. And planets do the same thing. That's how they evolve, is by intersecting with other planets that are holding a higher level of consciousness, and then they're initiated into that level of consciousness. This is also why certain ascended masters or beings will come down and sort of saturate their consciousness into the planetary field or into the collective consciousness field, so as to assist with the rising up of the beings, let's say humanity, who might be operating at a lower level of consciousness. And in this process, what happens is a lot of transmutation and clearing out. We are really no longer in the process of going through external stargates in the sense that we're ascending into the fifth dimension. There's a lot of stuff about that. And the way that I see that is it's a little bit of a false loop that keeps people and their linear mind, because that's sort of naturally what we do. We see things hierarchically or on a ladder, or we see things as stages, but like outside of ourselves. And it's really more like a Russian nesting doll. And that Russian nesting doll, those stargates that we think of happening outside of ourselves, the safest route is really internally. Because just the same way that we see distortion happening in the world around us, in the third dimensional plane, the physical reality, those distortions exist in the astral planes, the fourth dimension, the fifth, sixth, seventh, all the way up until we get into the God realms, which are unified fields. There's a danger in sort of traveling outside of our bodies and just blasting through if we're not really initiated in discernment, if we don't really understand that there are all kinds of beings and energies that we might come into contact with that are pretending to be something that they're not. We might get caught in weird little webs and loops. And so the safest way, and really the only way, as far as I'm concerned, where we are right now, is through the inner planes. And so this process of ascension is clearing out and transmuting the lower portions of our identity, the ego. And when I say transmuting the negative ego, the lower ego, it isn't just like we can kick it out. We have to literally witness it and move through it in order to even be able to bring in those higher levels of consciousness. Imagine that you try to bring in like something that's really refined, but it has, like, you're bringing in marble, walls of marble, or beautiful glass crystalline doors, but the foundation that you have isn't even dried or it's uneven. That isn't going to set very well, and the whole entire structure is going to be extremely distorted and unsustainable. That's exactly what happens when we try to bring in or braid in the higher portions of our DNA or the higher aspects or stations of our own identity into the body, is that we are not going to be bringing in clear, coherent, discerned information, data streams, and consciousness. We're going to be pulling in distortion, or we're going to be filtering it through that which is distorted, because the lower levels of our DNA, the human, the very physical, the 3D, the grounded, everyday, day-to-day, negative ego shit, for lack of a better word, hasn't been resolved. And so all of that's going to get filtered through that. That has to be cleared out first. So what we see happening sometimes is that people will start to attempt to bring in the higher stations of their identity, their soul, oversoul, monad level integration, but they're not actually prepared for that. And what ends up happening is something that looks kind of bizarre, something that looks very unintegrated. You might hear things that sound like words, but they don't have any real meaning to them. You can tell that the person saying it has no embodiment to back those words. There might be blanket statements. I posted something on my story earlier about, things like, it's all love, it's all light, and you're perfect the way that you are, and everything's beautiful. We can sort of end up in this astrally blissed out plane where we're really disconnected from what's actually happening here. This is, of course, a trap, and when it works as intended, we're kept off mission and in a state of amnesia about our original and intended blueprint and orientation or mission. Some of the things that I've seen around like 3D, 5D is that like there's going to be some actual physical split, and people who are operating in the 5th dimension are not going to be a match to anything that's happening in the 3rd dimension. And that's a really funky kind of way of looking at bifurcation, because bifurcation is also the process through which consciousness evolves. You sort of have to separate out. There's this period of intense polarization for refinement, because if we think about it, that polarization and that separation is both happening at an individual and a collective level. And we're moving the entire collective human body as a whole into a higher octave or a higher level of coherence. But that's not really possible until we start to separate out distortion from coherence. So we bifurcate, and that's really what we're living in right now. We are living in the times of the end of a cycle, which is a really exciting thing, but it's also a very pressurized thing. The heat is on, we can feel it, the initiation is here. And it's now or never, essentially. And it's not to say that in a rushed kind of sense, but really many of us are being backed into a corner. We have no option but to unify from within. And that is really the only way that we're going to do this. The idea here isn't to go break away off into a civilization where we're no longer in touch with reality as it is in the 3D plane. It's to be a body the same way that the earth as its own planetary body. It's to be a body that's bringing in a level of consciousness that can assist in raising the frequency or the oscillating frequency of the planet. It's not that we're going to just somehow pop ourselves into a magical garden place where this stuff doesn't exist. We have to see where those things that we don't like in the world exist within us, because we are, in a sense, part of the world. And so we've been raised here. We've picked up so much through many lifetimes. And that's really what we're here to transmute. And it is a brutal fucking process. There's really no other way to say it. And honestly, not everybody's going to even be able to understand this, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you do understand this, and if this is something that you're doing in this lifetime, my hat is off to you, because it is absolutely intense, and what it really requires is full surrender of the ego, and not in an artificial kind of way where, I'm going to be floating out in this blissed out place. It can be brutal. It can be beautiful, but it can also be brutal, because we are literally surrendering our ego. We are getting rid of this idea that I'm here to create my own reality. It's a very narcissistic way and a kind of a disconnected way of operating within the world. We understand, and we must come to understand, that we are designed to come back into unification with the one. We have to see all the ways that we're operating from separation. And I can tell you from personal experience, my God, have I operated from separation. I have certainly dishonored my fellow human. I've dishonored myself. And that is just part of the process. We have to learn to forgive ourselves, because it's messy down here. But we're humbled with our knees on the ground, and we are here to serve, not to serve our own egos. That's a sure way to end up in a diverging, declining, descension cycle and pathway. And so there's cycles of descension and ascension, and we've seen a huge descension within humanity and waves of ascension. The surefire way to be on what people call the organic timeline is to be fully in service. It's not about what can I get. It's about how can I serve, and how can I clear out and be radically truthful and honest with myself about where I'm still holding distortion, and be compassionate and loving with ourselves, and hold each other's hands as we're doing this. We're not doing this alone. Our brothers and sisters who are hearing this message, who are along this journey with us, are going through it in their own way. We gotta hold each other's hands, and we gotta walk through the fire. That's really what we're doing. We're purifying through the fire, and the pressure, like I said, is certainly on. But this is a gift. This is an initiation, and it's a gift. And if we choose to accept it as so, if we choose to see it as the gift that it is, it's gonna be a much easier process. Otherwise, our ego is gonna go fucking kicking and screaming, because it's, I want it this way and I want it that way. Well, you came here to be initiated. We all did. So it's not going to be what you want. It's going to be what you need. I mean, think about it. How many times in your life have you thought, why the fuck is this happening? This is the most horrible thing ever. And then 2 years later, you see exactly why that happened. And you're actually thanking that person or that situation for kind of pigeonholing you or putting you in that corner, in a sense, so that you have nowhere to go other than God. You have nowhere to go other than your own initiation and unifying from within. And we're really working on keeping ourselves in a state of somewhat neutrality, not that we don't have emotions, not that we, right? Neutrality in the sense that we're really able to move from the center of our being. And that's fucking hard. That's fucking hard because we have nervous systems that have been patterned by trauma. We have fragmentation within our personality, within our being. We got a lot of different things going on, but we have the people, the places, and the information that we need to be able to do this. And the thing is that we have it within ourselves. Remember the blueprint, because it's there. Much love. Hope you're all doing well. Have a good day.